I was talking about ecological context and about how that allows us to talk about the connection between personal and social stresses. So in the case of Victor, what he is complaining about, really, or in pain about, is that they have just gone through the stresses of bringing Yolanda home. And then very soon after, he has this clash with the school where he doesn't find the support needed to be able for this family to work. And when the therapist comes and talks to him in Spanish, he's able to express how he feels marginalized, he feels excluded, and how that causes, in his case, anger. And when he says that people like us, he says, internalize negative expectations that they're not going to be treated well, and he's not wrong. So, but the way he has the person that he could express it to is the therapist. So what he does say to Maggie is, why should I be telling you all these things and I don't know anything about you? And she gets upset by it, and she talks to me as a supervisor like, I think I have a standoff with the family. She feels it as an attack. So, and she worried that an impasse had been reached because he did not want to participate. And at the same time, she's worried correctly that if he doesn't comply, that then the situation with CPS is going to be a lot worse. So she asked me if I would come to the session, which is, if you work in a similar setting, that's easy to do to some extent. And also, I think we have a place to talk about supervision as live consultation. Family therapists have done that a lot over the years. Not only they come into sessions, but they stand behind a one-way mirror, or they see videotapes. They very much believe in meeting the family and in meeting the therapist with the family. So, so he was furious, and so I said, okay, I will agree to do supervision as a live consultation. And as I said, it has advantages and disadvantages at times, but it's, you could do it with audio tape or with videotape or self-supervision. And the reason I bring up self-supervision, just let me tell you a little anecdote to the side, but one that had such an impact on me that I will never forget it. There are things, that happens to you as a therapist that you'll never forget. So one of them is I meet Harry Aponte. And Harry Aponte, I don't know how many of you know him. He's worked in LA with a gang reduction project that I was involved in too. And so he has a very long trajectory. But at that time, he was fairly young, so was he, but he was a terrific therapist, and I was just beginning. And so I approached him after his presentations of videotape, and I said, how did you learn to do this? How did you do? There was a time when there were no family therapy programs like marriage and family therapy. How did you learn to do this? And he said, I watch my tapes. I watch my tapes a minimum of 11 times. Why did he say 11 times? I don't know. But he said, if I watch them 10, I realize I should watch them one more time because there's always something more that I will learn. But I'm my own supervisor. Before I can ask anybody for anything, I first criticize myself. Why did I say that? Could I have said this instead? I'll try it the next session if I do this instead of that. No. So I think videotape, if you can do it. I mean, it used to be so much easier to do it than it is now, where there's a lot of legal issues about it. But nevertheless, many families do agree if it is just for your use. So I think that's a marvelous way to learn. And the one-way mirror, of course, it's also great. So, but in this case, it was live. I just came into the room. So, and what did I do? Well, expressed my understanding for their outrage and their fear. I thought, it is logical you feel this way. And I explained that being an immigrant myself, I had been unaware about child abuse laws that applied, to everybody. I didn't say ethnicities and social classes. I said applies to everybody, no matter who you are. So I've seen cases that children would likely be removed from the home if people were unaware of this law. So this is something that happens, and it's common, and it's usually done in their best interest of the child. Well, they both relaxed a lot when they realized that this had something to do with North America. It didn't have to do with being targeted, or being stereotyped as being violent or mistreating their children. So it's very important to inquire about ecological context, about work, school, health, and the meanings it has for the person. Because what helps you to challenge these injustices it's important. So meanings of the person is, in this case, you'll see that it has particular meaning that is important, and I think I've anticipated to you about eating mother's food. And but if I were to continue with this case, I don't think we did it, but that what helps you challenge these injustices? Is it wise for you to challenge them? Because that's important. If I think Victor felt sufficiently empowered with Maggie to say, why should I tell you all of this when I know nothing about you? I don't know if it would have been smart or he would have done it with the school principal. That would not have gone. So it's important to find out what people do to help themselves in these situations. And so I think I already have done some of this, but I will repeat it in terms of clinical approaches. I don't know what that was, a door. So that empowerment, cultural resistance, social action, and you will see that there is a piece of social action in this case. And and in ecological context, it's also important to be able to help clients to recreate community. I think it was Los Angeles, somebody in Los Angeles, maybe the people who were working in the Noble Man Project, invented this idea or coined this term, la cultura cura, which means your culture heals you. And yes, it is true that rebuilding communities increases social capital, increases the possibility of cultural retention, and protects against depression in women, alcohol abuse in men, and gang involvement in youth. I can cite a lot of research on that. So what kinds of social action and empowerment are possible for Victor and Isabel? Well, this is something that we didn't plan. It was their idea. It was their creativity. So CPS had ordered parenting classes for Victor, right? At that time, there were no parenting classes close to them in Spanish. And Victor, who was a very intelligent man, figured that other Spanish-speaking parents were unaware, just like he was and I had been, about child protection laws and the psychological reasons for it in terms of best interest for the child. So he offered to develop this group himself by inviting parents that he met at work or at the trailer park, particularly fathers. And but that would not have gone with CPS sufficiently. So the parents asked Maggie to find a Spanish-speaking expert to facilitate this parenting group. And the therapist, Maggie, had over time come to understand this family in a deeper way. And she decided that she could facilitate this group at a local church. So both the family and the therapist were empowered by this experience. So it's important, I think, for all of us to learn, but I personally, again, I'm just going to tell you a little anecdote because sometimes it just come to my head, that I gave several parenting classes for immigrant parents at the Pro School in San Diego. That's a school for minority kids that is based on the university campus. And one of the things that some fathers, in particular, some mothers too, would get up in the question and answer period and say, "Doctor, I want to ask a question. If I don't hit my child, if I don't teach them how to respect me, how are they going to respect me? How are they going to, children in this, in America, they are just very disrespectful. They say to the parents, I hate you. Well, that's unheard of. We would never put up with that. So what you're telling us is that we can't touch them. We can't. So what are we going to do? And so I learned from that really, that it was lack of skills, lack of parenting skills that were similar to the ones that we teach here. And so it is very important to ask about social supports, about who do you turn to for advice, who do you talk to, who helps you in different ways, who helps you back home, and who helps you with parenting, which I should have there, because sometimes people learn from each other. And so this father was telling us is that he wanted to teach others. And so I believe that many times what people need is something that has to do with skills. And we need to, and I'm sure you do that already, that we need to be clear that that's what we're trying to do, and we're not blaming or accusing. So now let me go to family organization. So I'm always showing you this so that I remind you what it is. And so it's important that whenever we talk about separated families, both as a clinician and as a supervisor, what are our conceptual maps? Do we think of them as broken families? And I'm not talking just about immigrant families, any families that have been separated out of different stresses of poverty. Do we think that the ruptures between parents and children have irreparable developmental consequences? Well, if our view is like this, if our view is what we have absorbed from traditional psychology, Euro-American models of attachment, that parent-child emotional ties are based on ritualized everyday practices, where the emotional ties are simply based on, reading books, giving children a bath, that can only be provided by the biological mother, ideally in the household with a biological father, and ideally with small families and not a lot of children, so that we can devote your time to one or two of them or three of them at the most. So if your construction is that, and your construction is like Riki, remember the case at the beginning, a psychiatrist thinking that the great aunt could not be a devoted mother because she didn't have the energy anymore and might be resenting it. So he was operating from this kind of not only ritualized ideas about motherhood, but also idealized. But you may miss the fact that the immigrant mother, or who leaves her, or even the mother with very limited economic means, who leaves her child under the cares of others, may belong to a collectivistic culture. So you see, I put that little red circle around because that's probably a grandmother holding a grandchild's hand. And children may develop multiple attachments being raised by parenting relatives. Few people, the English in particular, have been good at doing research on multiple attachments. The English were also good at making good work with single attachments. But so if you're interested in the topic, there are very few things written by, but it's important that we learn more about extended families. We use models that belong to certain kinds of families and not to others. So Mexicans and Puerto Ricans have higher rates of co-residence and proximate living situations than whites. And they have more contact with extended family face-to-face by phone, by letter, by giving childcare or king support of all kinds. And that is true probably of many other groups than Mexican and Puerto Ricans. So what do we need to do in relation to that in terms of clinical approaches is to have curiosity and respect for those attachments, try to find more culturally attuned therapists, and as I've said before, transform our theories of attachment or of individuation. So how is family organization relevant to Yolanda's case? So what do you think were the supervisees, meaning Maggie, values, beliefs, and assumptions about Victor and his mother, and then Victor and Isabel's relationship? Remember that Maggie thought that Victor had a pathological attachment to his mother, that he couldn't leave her, and that Isabel was subserving and too accepting. And so, I just said, well, ask, do not assume. Question yourself with those two hypotheses. So she does, and what she finds out is what I told you, that Victor thought that his mother would die of sadness, but also he probably had a combination of feeling guilty about leaving, about he did send remittances as much as he could, and that he trusted that his mother would be an excellent caretaker, and that would be very pragmatic for them to be able to have a nest egg before reuniting with the child. And so it was a very proactive attempt, not something that he necessarily did out of weakness, perhaps something he did out of strength. And so, and then and Isabel, what she said was that Victor was very empathic with his mother, and that she understood that. She understood that her mother-in-law would be very upset by losing everybody. And so that, because now it was clear, since they had come and gone back 2 or 3 times, that that they were going to stay in the United States. So temporarily having Yolanda may have been something that the grandmother appreciated, and Isabel understood. However, the therapist was still kind of worried about the possibility that that Isabel was subservient to Victor, because she always was quieter in the sessions, and because she wanted to be nicer or less strict towards Yolanda. And so she was concerned that maybe there was some cover up, and I thought it was good for her to try to explore more whether there had been any child abuse. So she discussed with me, and I agreed, the possibility of having individual sessions. So create safety for disclosure in individual sessions, which is perfectly all right to do in family therapy or in any kind of therapy, to have individual sessions with the stated objective of understanding each person better. So you simply say, we would love to get together with you to understand each person better. But she also used them to explore possible ways. The private sessions did not unearth any new information, but they gave the wife and the child a chance to connect with the therapist more deeply. So what was important to find out was, first, the frequency with which the child, the physical discipline was used. So they all agreed that it was the first time the father had intervened forcefully on his wife's behalf against the whining child. And neither parent had a history of being hit as children, except for some occasional light spanking. So we also explored that. And in terms of the meaning, I do not know that Isabel perceived the subtlety of what he was saying, but I think that somewhat we did, because we were confused by him saying that she has to eat her mother's food, she has to obey her mother. So it seemed like a movement towards a family nuclearization, or becoming a nuclear family where the parents support each other. But I don't want to forget about grandmothers, not only because I'm a grandmother of 6, but because there are often other mothers there are other mothers, and that's not meant derogatory. There are other mothers, and they're very much part of the system in situations of poverty and in situations of immigration. In Ricky's example in the morning, it was a situation of poverty. They had been there. They're immigrants from Puerto Rico, of course. They're legal immigrants. They're part of the United States. That was not an issue. And they had been in this country for a very, very long time. But then eventually we found out that the mother had been drug addicted and she had been in and out of jail and she could not take care of the child. So the great aunt was the substitute mother. So she's the other mother, but she is a good mother. And so they are integral grandmothers to the lives of minority youth. And we need to inquire and include grandchild-grandparent relationships. There are unbelievably few studies about grandparents and the importance of grandparents in situations of poverty and what it means to be raised by a grandparent and both for the parents, the grandparents, and the children. And I think it's equally the case that most of our ideals in terms of what we do in therapy, individual or family, is on the basis of what is a good practice and what's helpful to small families and not to large families. Small families are very different than large families. Large families, I have them in parentheses because I mean extended families often, but it can also be nuclear families with many children. My father was a child in a family of 8. And that is very, very different than being a child in a family of 2 children. And the level of intensive parenting, individual attention, the level of democracy in a small family where you ask children rather than telling them what they need. What happened? I didn't move it. It was my hand just going like this. Okay. And problems in small families tend to be magnified, while problems in very large families, by necessity, they need to be minimized. So I think that if we compare these columns, we could easily see that mainstream culture, and particularly professional cultures, favor the ideals of small families. And often we try to make large families behave like small ones. And we're happy when they do, but is that necessarily necessary? I don't really know. I think that I think we don't know enough about large families. So I think I already said this. So let's move on to family life cycle. The family life cycle of this family is interesting. We can go more extensively into it by asking what are the life stages and stressors in Yolanda's family. You were being interactive. I could ask you this and I'm sure you would know because they're very much there, things like Yolanda's school entrance, the birth of the second child, the parents' new stage of parenting, they're all there. So and they're all stressors. Yolanda's school entrance is very stressful to immigrants. I will never forget when I took my first child to school and how stressful it was for me just even to see how different the school was to the school that I grew up in or that I went to as a child. And so it's a very emotional time. Just put it that way, that is emotional if it's not stressful. And then the second child birth, and there's no childcare, no extended family help. So they've been dealing with all of that. And they had the help of a daycare center. But the parents' new stage of parenting, possibly, it's like, do they, a family of 4 now, they have to parent 2 children, one who's a 6-year-old, one who's a 2-year-old, and possibly a mother's consolidation role as mother, and the grandmother's own shift of roles. So there is a lot to be to worry about in terms of the life stage. And so you could even ask yourself, would Yolanda be treated by the father less harshly if by refusing to eat, if there was no migration, no new parenting, no middle class intervention about the stress consequences? So it's possible that he wouldn't have. That this were all the stresses coming together. So the family life cycle is a very important way of looking at the developmental issues the family and the individuals in the family are faced with. And that's true no matter what culture you're in. That's why these 4 domains I chose them because of their universality, of the fact that all families have to go through developmental stages. All families are organized in certain ways. All families have, particularly in issues of poverty and migration, may have different types of relational stresses. And all families are part of an ecological context. So how you fill in each one of those domains depends on the families that you're seeing. In terms of life cycle values, many families are faced with child rearing that is traditional versus modern, or minority versus mainstream. So good manners and consideration of others is true of many cultures that have a relational focus, that are 3-generational, that where adults and children are together all the time. So aggression control, that fatherhood said to me, I cannot tolerate a child that says to the parents, I hate the mother or the father, I hate you, because you're not letting me play with this or that, or because you're not letting me watch TV or something. And so these are important things for us to understand, that when we talk about culture, are we talking about traditional cultures, or are we talking about modern cultures of child rearing? Are we talking about controlling rebelliousness, or thinking that that's part of being autonomous and an individual? So we live in the United States very much in a society that fosters autonomy and self-maximization, where the focus is individuals, don't tell me what to do. The focus is assertiveness, permissiveness, where I can accept rebelliousness and use explaining all the time. I'll explain to my child so they will understand. Or at the most, I will put them in timeout, but then I'll explain why, So it's not that, U.S. Grown people don't discipline their children. Of course they do, but they may be very different, and the level of demands for good manners and consideration of others, or what in Spanish is called bien educado, right? So it's important to understand rather than force people to think in particular ways. We first have to find out, what do they think, And so in terms of adolescence, I'm sure that many of you work with adolescents of minority families that grow up observing the individualistic democratic values of small families. Even if they don't have friends in small families, they will meet kids in school, or they would meet teachers that emphasize the values of being individualistic and democratic. While the parents may have grown up with a collectivistic, more hierarchical values of large families. And, I was talking about that videotape that I saw umpteen years ago of Harry Aponte. Harry Aponte is Afro-Caribbean Puerto Rican. And so he saw over time many, many African-American families. And in the session, he does a marvelous job of connecting with everybody. And at some point, he says to the grandmother who is raising the children, just show me how you get them to be silent. Show them how you get them to pay attention to us. We're talking, show me. And the grandmother had a newspaper with her. And she gets up with a newspaper and she goes, well, I'm going to do it so that you see it. She goes like this. She doesn't touch the children at all, but she goes, pay attention. She goes to this side. I told you to pay attention, you know? And so she's doing it her way. So is that child abuse? You know, she has to raise, that was a family, like 10 people were in the room. She has to raise them all. And some are adolescents, some are little ones going everywhere. And he says, show me how you do it. And she feels so comfortable with him, she just shows him without fear, without anything. And what she was showing is that she was showing that she had a hierarchical position in that family. And if she said, you pay attention to me, they would have to do it. And she would do it as many times as it was needed. She would say, this nice gentleman is talking to us and you're talking over him. That's not acceptable. Pay attention. Well, you know, I think that those are the kinds of things that we have to ask families to show us, because we come in with our own frames about what's right and what's wrong. And we are not agents of right and wrong. We are agents of helpful. Okay? And helpful without damage. You know, of course, you know, we don't want to damage anybody. We want damage control. And so it's important to do to understand what families feel is helpful. So it's a whole, you know, chapter in Adolescence in the book, but I do talk about issues of adolescence out of control, because many times we have a simplistic view of what's happening in the family. And I've coined this term called SEFSA, which we have to take into account cultural value difference. It's very much tied to MECA, in the sense that the cultural value differences are in family organization and how to live a life cycle. Things like obedience to parents, and then ecological fears, because of tremendous dangers to adolescents. Adolescents of color, are in tremendous danger all the time. So the parents have to be very strict. They have to teach them how not to put themselves even further in the path of danger. And so is important, to understand that if you stay late and you're alone and you are driving, that you must protect yourself in this way, mostly by coming back home. And so that is ecological fears. And also tremendous separation anxiety, because there have been so many lost children along the way. For Mexicans, it's losing, for Latinos many times, losing people to a different mentality, different language, different lifestyle. But also you could literally lose children by death or incarceration, or many different ways. So the parents have a lot of separation anxiety. I think both therapists and supervisors need to be able to explore SEFSA when we are working with minority families. Okay. So let me take some questions here, because I feel that I'm just talking, and don't have a sense of whether any of this applies to what you're doing and or not. And I have a lot more to cover, but at the same time, I'm beginning to feel that I'm giving you a lot by giving you all of these different things. So I just want to know, are you following me? And how is this useful in any way?
We're waiting for a response.
Okay. There's no right or wrong. It's just that I'd like some feedback,
People may be writing.
Okay.
I think the mere fact they're still here is a wonderful sign. So it might be that.
Okay.
Let me tell you, I'll tell you when some things come up. So just keep going and I'll let you know.
Okay. Okay. So I have done so far. I'm going to summarize. Okay, I'm going to summarize, and then I will go back to supervision with some ideas.
Okay,
So,
we did get a few comments. Okay, people are saying thank you, still following, very relevant to what we experience here in San Diego, working with many immigrant populations. That's where we are. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So what I've done so far is to talk about a systemic and postmodern foundations for practice. What do I mean by that? I've given you a multidimensional definition of culture, right? I mean, the ecological context with all the different parts of it, with ecological niche, multiple contexts and cultural borders. I have asked, that we go beyond cultural stereotypes by exploring these four domains for how it involves each family, and rather than coming in with preconceived ideas that you ask, don't assume, that as much as possible, look at the strengths and not at the deficits, and that you and your supervisor, you as supervisor and your therapist, be self-reflexive and assume a culturally humble stance. So what I would like to move on, is something that it relates to MECA, and in its what I've been sort of liking to start thinking of supervision as co-vision. That I think that some of what I presented today by creating these diagrams of three types of maps, the maps of the family, the maps of the therapist, and the maps of the supervisor, and they are identical in terms of their structure, and that I am trying to say that we're going to arrive to this as a three-part model that is a co-vision, in the sense that we show curiosity, respect, transparency of culture and social location of all parties, and we co-construct the interventions. Okay, so and to do that, to sort of go on with that idea, I'm going to say that that there are some training in MECA tools and reflections for the supervision encounter that I think we need to think about. I gave you a lot of the MECA tools, and those are sufficient. But I think in terms of reflections, we could go further and ask, what is the nature of this supervisee relationship? Is it inevitably hierarchical? Is it a teacher-student? Is it expert case consultant? Is it a mentor or mentee? Are we collaborators with different expertise? So if you had to choose, which one would you say? Or which ones would you say? Either. Any ideas?
One response, someone wants you to repeat the question, and someone said student, and someone else said we learn from each other, a blend, but it depends on the trainees' developmental levels.
Yeah, those are very good answers. Yeah, is supervisor supervisee. What I meant, the nature of the supervisor-supervisee relationship. Yes, it depends very much on the developmental stage of the supervisee, but let's take back the case that I was talking about. Do you think that I learned something from Maggie? From Maggie, my supervisee. She's much younger than me. She's giving me a piece of culture that I don't have. She's telling me how the school is thinking about the case. She's telling me how Child Protective Services is thinking about the case. And so I could consider her my collaborator with a different expertise. I mean, I more experienced than she is, but she has a type of expertise that I don't have. And that's sort of what I mean by co-vision. That that if I come in as an expert case consultant all the time, I'm just going to tell my supervisee what to do. If I'm the teacher and she's the student, or she or he is the student all the time, I'm not going to try to obtain what their thoughts are. Remember, and this is very important that I underline it. I asked her very early in the supervision, tell me 3 guesses you have about what's happening in this family. I don't know how I came up with 3 guesses, but for some reason I always end up with 3 guesses. I always feel maybe that when I've done 2, it's either one or the other, and 3 always kind of enriches the thing, enriches the conversation. And then I also always ask, now that you told me these 3 things, and they're all possible, they're all fine, but it depends on how much you will find out about each one of these. How would you go about finding out about these 3 guesses? And that is very enriching, because then they have to think what kinds of questions they have to ask. So that's how I, the teacher and the expert consultant. But I'm asking questions. I'm not telling her, this is what you should do. Now you should do a migration catching up narrative, because they have the 6 years of not being together and they're missing a lot of information about those 6 years. We're going to get to that. Once she decides that these are the questions she's going to ask, I may then ask, well, how would you go about finding out more about what they missed during these years? And that then becomes, then I can give it a name, catching up, migration narrative.
I think
So,
someone
yeah.
added something that's an amplification. Only if you're open to what she had to teach, end quote. Not you as a person, but anyone who can be your teacher if you're open to learn. And the nature of the relationship changes with each case and each supervisee.
I agree. I completely agree. And I think I'm also very biased on this, because I work in a community health center. And the community health center is managed. It's completely taken care of, really, by medical students. And but there are supervisors for the medical students. They are attending physicians, and but the motto is, the community is the expert. The patient is your teacher. The patient is your teacher. Because it is true that if you spend time with the patient is going to teach you a lot if you're open. And the same thing is true for the supervisor. Your supervisee is going to teach you a lot if you don't come in as a directive, a hierarchical position because what does supervision mean? Supervision means I have a supravision, which is fine. I use it to, it's like it is established in the field. But I just want you to think about the possibility of whether co-vision is the same as supervision. And what do I mean by that is that strictly supervision as a term could be seen as the supervisor is the expert, the supervisor is hierarchical, this directive is prescriptive. And if you could add co-vision to supervision, then you could say, but I bring curiosity, I bring respect, I bring transparency of where I'm coming from, transparency of culture and social location. And therefore I co-construct. So for example, to Maggie, I probably most likely told her the same anecdote I told you about when I taught parenting. I had this large parenting group, which was actually, what is it that when the school meets with the parents? a meeting of parents, teachers, and then some of the parents, and very few teachers were there, started raising their hands like, well, if you tell us not to hit our children, what do we do instead? That I did tell that to Maggie, most likely, and said, I learned this. I learned that many times parents in this situation, what they're showing us is they don't know other ways of doing it. That's skill. So I just tell something about, I'm transparent about, sometimes about my own personal life, or sometimes like I did, feeling intimidated by Minuchin and not wanting to have anything to do with him. So you probably do that as a supervisor, but I think when you do that, you are moving in the direction of saying, I'm being transparent about what influences me. Okay. So how do I I'm going to go further in telling you how do I use this when I start supervision. I started many times this way, by saying, let's exchange names. I would like to introduce my name using my entire name. This is my entire name. So if you look at my entire name, what can it tell me about me? What can it tell you about me? So what can it tell you about my social location, my ethnicity? So I sometimes introduce myself this way. And then I ask my supervisee to say, could you tell me about your name? Could you tell me what your name can tell me about you? Where did I learn that? I learned it at the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic in the late 1970s, where as part of the training, we were supposed to guess from a name something that would allow us to ask questions from the family. It was the name and the location in the city where they lived, the address. And it was just an exercise. But I think it's an interesting one. So, that's something I sometimes do. I don't know if you would want to do it, but I'm just sharing. And so in a group, you could, if you're teaching in supervision in a group, you could share your first and last name and the origin of your name as your first doors to your ecological niche. Or you could use it between two individuals, again, as your first door towards your ecological niche or social location. So, and I ask these questions. When you look at your name, what does it evoke in terms of your origins? And your supervisee's name and your supervisor's name, just what I did. But this is an important question. What do you think the other is going to think when they see your name? Do you ever think about what your supervisee is going to think when they see your name? Or you think about your supervisee when you see their name? And when they both look at the family? So names give away a lot. They give away a lot of things about ethnicity, about perhaps race. What does it mean to you to be perceived that way? So, I have the feeling that I missed something before that I did.
Celia, before you go on, there is one question. Is that okay?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure.
Can you speak to assimilation? In my experience, that is what immigrant parents struggle with as their children are interacting and learning with the greater society.
Can I speak to assimilation? Yes. I think that many parents do struggle with that. If we go back to the slide that I had on adolescence, when I was saying the children are incorporating the values, I think that there is some very important work in biculturalism that talks about the importance of both the parents. So imagine that these are the parents' fear that you're very well describing is that they're going to lose the children, that the children are going to be farther away from them, that they're not going to speak their language, that they're not going to have their values, that they're going to uh, reject them in some way or reject their culture. And that, and if they stick too rigidly to no, you have to be here all the time, you have to, you can't go out, you have to be back at 8:30 because that's our curfew, even though the curfew of your friends is 11:30. Or if they say, we cannot accept that you are changing because that you're not respecting us, and you always respect over everything because we gave you life and we are giving you food. So they're rigidly, or they punish for breaking the rules. They're rigid with that. That is, they really lose more authority. Now, if they are too flexible with that, unfortunately, they miss too much authority too, by being very permissive and giving up and saying, I can handle them. They're doing whatever they want. They're just, they don't dare intervene because the children have become too powerful. So neither scenario about assimilation is good. The good scenario is enough cultural retention, because over time, what happens with the children, and we see it in the second generation, like in my book, I have a chapter called Roots or Wings. Roots or wings. So what happens is the second generation at the beginning wants the wings. They're 14, they're 15, they want to be out with their friends, they want to be able to try a new drug. They're just, they think their parents are old-fashioned. But by the time they're 25 or 30 and they start having children, they want some roots too. And they come back either to the church or to the parents, or they want the parents' help. And so something in the middle is very important. And what's that middle? The middle is for the parents to come closer to understanding the children, and that certainly family therapy can do that, to open up communication about what is it that they have in mind, that is with their different mentalities, not that they're bad, it's a different mentality. And for the parents to understand, for the children to understand the parents too, that this is part of caring. What I showed about SEFSA, that the parents are scared, that they have ecological fears, that they have separation anxiety. So it becomes a psychological conversation with the children present, children meaning adolescents present. So I think the issue of assimilation is not for the parents to say, well, we live in a different culture and we have to accept it, because total acceptance doesn't work, and total rigidity about the old way doesn't work either. Does that answer your question? Okay. I'm just a little bit worried about something, that when we took the break, I was about to say something and I didn't say it. So I'm going to go back for a minute to just say it, because I think it's relevant to the issues of comparing ecological niche and shame or pride. And the name. So when Victor in the family says people like us and says that he's being discriminated, in retrospect, when Maggie asks me to go in and talk to him, what I do works well at the moment, which is to tell him that it's not discrimination, that's how the United States works, that there is child abuse laws here that are for the benefit of the child, and that all parents, regardless of race, color, social class, they have to abide by that. And so, fine, it works for that. Is that what I would do today? I'm not sure. I think today I probably would say, tell me more about how you think you're being discriminated against. Because I think we have an obligation to bring out those issues that people don't bring out uh, squarely to us because they're they're not in a place where they feel safe to do that, but we need to make that place safe to be able to help them feel empowered uh, to face the possible discrimination. I would say today something like, uh, so how would you deal with this? Would you ask to make sure to see that you are in the waiting list for childcare? Could you do that? Is that something that would work for you? So, because he's saying, I don't know that we were put in there, but it's possible that the person in the front desk of the school has the waiting list, and you can say, oh, can I see where I am in the waiting list? That's a sort of a kind of advocacy that therapists and supervisors can do. So I just wanted, I'm not sure whether I covered it or not. I don't think I did, and I wanted to tell you that. So, and then in supervision, what I would do is compare ecological niche, which we've already done, but I usually ask my supervisee to do very quickly their own ecological niche. That doesn't change with the family. It can be applied to different families. And you can see areas where sometimes I even do it with a circle, with color, and like areas in which I can be empathic and I can even join and say something, about our similarities, and some things I don't understand. And I need you to please tell me more so that I understand it better. Okay. You could also do it. I'm just showing you many different ways to do it. I do sometimes my genogram, and so I can do my genograms with all the different times that my parents migrated, I migrated. So you could do your own genogram, which I think is a very good, it's a very good training exercise anyhow. And then you could do simple comparisons of genograms in supervision, like the supervisee brings it. So I usually like to have one session with a supervisee before we start with talking about families, where we get to know each other. And this is one way. And so, and it really is sort of part of joining, like you do in family therapy, and part of getting to know each other. And that's certainly very important to know each other in terms of your family history. You don't have to reveal everything. You reveal what you feel comfortable revealing. It's not, nobody demands self-disclosure. It's just part of getting to know each other. And then I do compare definitely this, because the theoretical orientation niche is very, very important. I am, like Carol told you, I'm in charge of directing at the free clinic. The free clinic is for undocumented, I'm sorry, no, I didn't mean undocumented, no, because many people are in the process of obtaining documents. We have a legal clinic. Many have started that way, but they're not currently. But they're uninsured and they're underserved, and many times unemployed or underemployed. And so we provide total free services. And about maybe 15 years ago, I volunteered at the clinic and I did therapy by myself for 7 years. And then I decided, and I talked to the director of the clinic, that the need for mental health services was so great that that I would like to invite more volunteer therapists. And that's what I did. And many of them needed to be bilingual because we had so many monolingual clients. And so over time, today, we have a lot of volunteers, and it's extraordinary how much the clinics have become their families, and they do volunteer once a week, sometimes twice a month, sometimes once a month. But we have a lot of volunteers, and some of them use interpreters too. And because I often supervise the volunteers, and many of them, it's not a training situation, many of them already have their licenses, but nevertheless, the work at the clinic demands some supervision. And so what I want to say in relation to this is that I have learned through that experience of being in touch with so many different therapists doing that it is important to share your theoretical niche. I have, just to give you an example, I have two volunteers that are both extraordinarily good, young women, fantastic, both of them. And I am, I'm very much in touch with them and their work. One of them is at the Psychoanalytic Institute, and the other one is a narrative family therapist. They're both doing good work, but the work is so different and the supervision is so different because the one that is psychoanalytically oriented, what she always says to me is, I can't do very much here. There's so much trauma in this population, I can only do exploratory supportive work. While the other one, who's narrative family therapist, she never says that. She always deals with it in her own narrative way. So I cannot teach the one who's psychoanalytically oriented how to be narrative. That is not her theoretical niche. So it's important that you discuss in what ways your theoretical niche is one that coincides in some ways and it doesn't coincide, and in which things you may be suggesting that she doesn't or is not able to do, and which things she's willing to learn new things. Are you following me? That it's important because we live in a world of just many different forms of doing therapy, just many, perhaps too many at times. So it is very important for supervisor, supervisee to become aware of your own position regarding cultural diversity and social justice, and to discuss in advance these views rather than wait until there are problems. I mean, when there are problems, then it becomes a little bit too late. Like in Ricky's case, it was too late to discuss differences. But it wasn't, I want to clarify that actually Ricky died. Ricky died. He did not die of cultural misunderstandings. He died because his open heart surgery for his congenital heart defect did not work. It produced over time a filling up of the lungs, and he died of that he could not be saved. It wasn't cultural misunderstanding. It could have happened to many children under that situation. But I thought, when all of that was done, that much suffering on the part of the great aunt could have been spared if people had been empathic, had been understanding her many, many strengths, her incredible nurturance, her religiosity as a strength, and rather than and they would have done themselves something like self-reflection or cultural humility and say, where are we coming from? Why are we saying that she can't do this? Why are we saying her food is not good? We have to, intervene in some way that is useful. So it wasn't useful to blame the victim of the situation. So how we are perceived culturally is very important. So I sometimes do encourage therapists to supervisees to formulate ideas of how they may be perceived by their clients or by their supervisees. Remember how I said I worried that Maggie could be intimidated by me? So after I asked her about the 3 hypotheses, I immediately, when she brought them up, I praised her for the tremendous work she had done with that. So it is very important, and I wasn't going to do it just for with that basis. I just don't say, oh, you did a great job, just like a parent shouldn't say, oh, you're wonderful. No, you have to say, what did you do, right? That you are impressed by, that you appreciate. So including culture in supervision, it's very important. But once we do that, we have to also make culture part of our discussion, not culture is something that is out there. So,
One quick question or reflection.
yes.
A comment. In what way can we talk about these things without sounding political? I'm just thinking about the perceived power dynamics.
I think you're being political no matter what you do. If you don't talk about it, you're being political too. If you don't say anything about, a gender inequality that suppresses a woman's voice, and you don't say anything about it, you are going along with the idea that it's okay for a husband to speak uh, for 45 minutes of the session and the wife for 10. And so if you intervene by saying, I want to hear from your wife too, you're being political. And I think that maybe you can explain to me more. Is it that you are concerned about talking about social justice with your supervisee? Or tell me more. And because I don't want to just dismiss the question by saying you're always being political, but I don't hear you.
Okay, we'll see what happens. I haven't gotten a follow-up. He's talking about my supervisor-supervisee relationship, sounding political in the supervisor-supervisee relationship.
Okay.
And then I have one more after that.
Okay. And but I don't think then I answered that question, right? So as a supervisor, you're concerned that if you say anything about, including in the MECA social justice approaches like empowerment or giving voice, or that would sound like you are being political.
I think that's correct. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that you could use a different word if you feel more comfortable, such as the need for balance or equality. So, for example, balancing. I just wrote a paper that the title is "Centering the Voice of Minority Clients." In working with disadvantaged populations. So I think if you want to hear what people have to say, you are going to have to listen in between the voices about something they say when they say people like us. So are they implying in people like us that people like us are not treated equally? And so I would have to say something about, so for example, we haven't covered that, and it's probably a topic for another conversation at some of an entire seminar about what happens in situations with a supervisee being a supervisee of color and a white supervisor. Are there special issues to be discussed? Are there things that the white supervisor needs to learn about their unconscious white privilege that the supervisee of color can teach? So these are questions to be grappled with. I'm not saying that you should take my answer. I'm just saying that it's hard not to hear politics today and what people are saying.
And the last one, and we have about 10 minutes left in the whole session, but one more thing. I love the suggestion for exploring experiences of discrimination with the client. This locates the problem of discrimination outside the client and family unit, and perhaps how to advocate for the client. So that's a different level of approach, I think.
Yes. I mean, I'm not, it's important, and I love the question, really. I thought it was a great question. And because it makes me both think about how you could be seeing this, but also it makes me understand that that it is not an imposition, that we cannot impose it as a way of thinking. It is a little bit about what I told you about my trainee who's being trained at the Psychoanalytic Institute. If she really thinks that that there's too much trauma in this population and she can't do the type of work she wants to do, I have to hear that. And it would be perhaps too political on my side to say, but this other therapists are dealing with it in this form that includes politics, that includes how the trauma could have come from discrimination, from other things. So you have to judge where it is that you can and cannot use it. But I think it's always drawn from something said either by the client or by the therapist, that then the supervisor can take and say, should we look at this way? Mm-hmm. That may include politics. So, what I think I want to finish with is that and it relates to some of these questions, that the supervision is critical to a practitioner's development of cross-cultural practice. If, as a supervisor, I take a universal position or I take a particularistic position, there's no need for multicultural supervision. There's no need. We're treating everybody as though they're the same. And so supervisors who are multiculturally inclined must be an active part of the process of learning about culture. They must be comfortable with disclosing cultural and social location about themselves. And they must be comfortable with modeling cultural self-awareness and with being open to discussions about cultural diversity and social justice. See, for example, this question, I think it was a great question, that if you're with your supervisor and your supervisor says something, or you bring it up, you could, because you're the supervisor, you could say, do you think it would be useful to think about, external issues that are impacting the family or impacting the client? Do you think that if we talk about the client's ecological niche or social location, we're going to discover some areas where the client may feel a sense of despair, of shame, of lack of understanding of people, that everybody thinks that they're underemployed because they are lazy, when they don't understand that they put so many applications and they're always being rejected and they don't understand why. So you would have to say something about, if you don't want to say social justice, you could say social location, or, or social standing, or social something, So MECA, it's in a systematic, comparative way, brings up a need for being non-stereotype and approach both culture and context in therapy. And you explore together how culture and power impact their own views. By the way, that's another way to talk about social justice, just power, right? Oh yes, I think the person who asked did say power. So, okay. Impact their own views and their ramifications for their relationship with clients. So let me just finish by saying that with multi-stressed families, therapy can cast about in many different directions. That is the nature of the work, dealing with new crises at each session. Many people that have worked in the county, and I, as a young woman, I did work in the county. It was even before there were wraparound services. Why is there wraparound services? Well, because there's so many things that are creating stress, that there are multi-stressed families in many ways, and individuals dealing with new crises each session, either whether it's housing, whether it's a food situation, transportation. So they are overwhelming to the clients, to the practitioners, and to the supervisors. So for me, a systematic approach for cultural assessment and in supervision and in therapy and in supervision, such as MECA, helps to anchor explorations while finding hope for positive change. So I think I'm going to end there, but I'm going to just mention this that I think Carol showed you the hard copy because she probably got it early, the hard copy of Latino Families in Therapy. But there is in Amazon and other places the second edition now in paperback, and it's very inexpensive, like $20 or so. And so if you're interested in learning, I did use a lot of the things that are in the book, and the case is explained in greater detail in the book with more interventions. So I just mention it in case you want to refer to that. And the book that you can't see it very well in the big screen. I see it in the small screen pretty well. That is the book that Carol and Ed Shafransky and myself co-edited on supervision, and it has a chapter on migration-specific competencies. So do we have like 5 minutes or so for questions, if you like?
Mainly it's thank you, saying that the semantics could be tricky, a wonderful presentation, looking forward to the latest edition, love the first one. So many things to integrate into supervision. Appreciate the model and information. Generally, affirmation. I don't see any other questions. I think you have just been, as always, superb, and that you've managed somehow in 3 hours, a little less than 3 hours. They're saying they love your heart in this.
Okay.
That you have managed to communicate the passion and the structure of the model, and how respectful and how culturally humble you are, and what an incredible model it is for us all. They want to know if you have a website.
No, I don't anymore, but I do. But you could email me, and if you want any articles from me, I'll send them to you.